Community Hangout. I'm joined this week for a special hangout with Will Stroll, the king of hotcakes, and also a few of our friends from the DNN architecture team, community committers for the DNN platform, Vicens Massanas, Peter Donker, Oliver Hine, and Eric VB, although he does code in C# as well. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining me today. We've been running on Git and GitHub now for a little over a year and a half, and one of the things that we all know from having tried to use this system or use the system is that it's not always easy to figure out. So why don't we start and get a quick introduction on who everyone is, and maybe just a little bit of background on your experience with Git and GitHub, and then we can take it from there and sort of walk through the process of how we use that for managing pull requests. So we'll kick it over to you, Vicens. I think you're muted. But
yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I've been mainly using SVN for my whole career, and the switch to GitHub is not been. If I can say something, it's not been pleasant by now. So I'm comfortable with managing Git, but merging and the more advanced stuff is where seems to be a bit more complicated. So I hope that we can cover that today.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, great. Peter, how about yourself? How about your experiences with Git and GitHub? And where are you finding challenges or?
Actually, I have to say that my switch to Git was more of a very pleasant experience. I did use SVN, Subversion, everything before. Never really liked it a lot, but then again, I was often involved in larger open source projects, so people spread out over the globe. Always running into issues of people having files locked, and what do we do, where do we go, etc., and everything needed to be coordinated, and development was just slow and sluggish. And Git kind of is the oil in the machine. And for me, I haven't looked back. I've switched, myself as well, everything over to Git. In part because I liked it a lot, and in part because I think by completely betting on it, if you like, it forces you to solve everything for your own projects and also for the larger projects. So you tend to learn faster if you do that jump right into it. Yeah, one of the, I love the simplicity of just the concept of just having a file and a hash, just storing that file and a hash of all the files that you have. I love that. I mean, that concept is very easy to grasp, or at least for a developer, I think.
Sure.
But yeah, where it gets tricky is the branching, the did I already push this somewhere else or not, and how can I repair this? I mean, the typical case is you've kind of click, you worked, you push something up, and you go, oh crap, there's this file here that should have gone into that commit. It doesn't, I can get pretty perfectionist about which file goes into which commit, and and it was all labeled and everything, and now all of a sudden there's this floating commit somewhere saying, oh, by the way, I forgot these couple of files. So that I think are my biggest challenges with Git.
Okay, good. Now, Oliver, I understand that you actually have quite a bit more experience with Git and GitHub, and you've been using it for quite a while, especially in the work you're doing for Engage. Is that correct?
A little bit. I mean, we've been transitioning over to Git basically around the same time that DNN has done the transition. So it's just been day-to-day use and learning as we go. It's been a lot of fun. I love it a lot more than PFS. don't really have anything nice to say about TFS, but Git seems to go a lot smoother. It's been a lot of fun to keep up with the internal development of DNN and to move over some of the changes I've run internally into branches and just maintain them, keep them up to date. Everything seems to just go a lot smoother, take a lot less time.
Okay, good. Yeah, I've heard that about TFS from a lot of people, but the one thing that I would always say to them is that TFS, at least it's not source safe, so, or visual source safe. So, there is something good to be said about it.
Yep, no, that is true. I've forgotten completely about source safe.
Okay. And Eric, how about you? What's your experience been like with Git and GitHub, and sort of where can we focus to help?
Well, I was getting kind of up to speed when I was still part of DNN Corp and on the engineering team, and then I switched off being on the web team, which had a lot less involvement with Git. So, and then in my current job, it's 100% TFS. So.
Okay.
I haven't worked with Git for well over a year, I think, and I've become a bit rusty, I would say.
Okay, good. So really, today's session is about, covering a pretty broad range. We're going to focus primarily on pull requests, because pull requests are not the way that most people deal with managing source code, right? So a lot of people, especially outside of the open source community, you're used to just pushing directly to the repository and doing direct commits. And so we're going to focus today on managing pull requests and the pull request process that we use for the DNN platform, and sort of go from that angle. And so, Will's going to keep me honest here. Will ask some questions as we go along to make sure we're keeping things clear. But if you guys have any extra questions or want me to drill into a specific area a little more, then feel free. Everything is going to be very ad hoc, so I don't have a lot of stuff that I prepared ahead of time, other than we have a set of pull requests and things that we already have ready to be processed, so we'll go ahead and use those as an example. So I'm going to be doing all of this based on the process that we've outlined internally, and we'll publish in some release or in some show notes a link to the document that we use for managing pull requests. But for the most part, I'll be doing most of this from memory. So if I may miss one or two things along the way, but for the most part, it's pretty obvious. So let me go ahead and share out my screen here. So, Will, did you have anything you wanted to add before we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a very similar background to everybody else here, where most of my career has been on SVN, and I still love SVN, but and it didn't have any problems that I needed to solve. But with the introduction of Git, I realized that there were some problems that were there that I didn't know were there, right? So I have been starting to use Git, but I would say by no stretch of the imagination am I even close to being an expert or somebody who can answer the questions for people. But even though I have a handful of repositories now out there, and I contribute to a handful of others, I think my biggest thing is the pull request thing, the release process. And when you're dealing with different projects, I know we're going to be focusing on one here, but when you go from project to project, every single one of them is different, and you have to like relearn somebody's thought process around like, okay, how should I deal with this person's repository?
Yeah, no. And the nice thing is, once you understand pull requests, once you understand a little bit of the basics of Git, then it becomes much easier to figure out, right? And it's like, once you learn this for DNN, this applies to almost every open source project that's out there on GitHub today, and even a lot of them, they're on Codeplex. So we all use pretty much the same process. The processes that we have for DNN have been adopted from a number of other open source projects, and places like the way GitHub runs their repositories, the way Microsoft is now running their ASP.NET repositories. So you know, we tried to pull from what other communities are already doing, so we're not, you know, way out in left field with our own processes. There are a few things that are unique to us, but by and large, we're kind of the same cookie cutter as everyone else. So let me go ahead and share out my screen here, if I can figure out which one this is that I'm supposed to.
While you figure that out, for anybody that might be watching right now, if you have a question for us, just post it on Twitter, hashtag it DNN Hangout, or go ahead and direct it directly to myself, @WillStroll, and we'll get that asked for you.
Okay, and so everyone can see my screen okay now? You should be looking at a GitHub pull request for DNN platform. So we're going to start from here, and we'll talk a little bit about what a pull request is and some of the bits of this, because they change depending on whether a pull request is coming from outside, i.e. a community contribution, or whether they're coming from a community committer or someone else with direct commit rights to the platform. So we might see two different ways that pull requests come in, and effectively there are two models for handling pull requests. There is the fork and pull method, so fork and pull is what you probably have done many times submitting pull requests into DNN, right? It all starts with forking the DNN platform into your own GitHub repository, and then conversely, once you've made your change, you submit what's called a pull request, which is a difference between your repository and the DNN platform repository. The other type of pull request that we get is one from people who have direct commit rights against DNN platform. And for those individuals, what they end up doing is, instead of creating that fork in their own repository or in their own GitHub account, is they create a branch inside the DNN software DNN platform account. So if you look at our code base, what you'll see is that we have a lot of branches here under bugs. So each one of these branches is trying to deal with a separate issue, and they all potentially are going to come in as new pull requests once they're done working on that branch. So we've got a number of them here that have already been submitted, and I'm going to pull one that it should be fairly straightforward, this send email one. And we just want to make sure that in this case she's making some changes to make sure an email address can't be empty. And so just trying to fix a particular bug that someone may have entered in Jira, or even one of our own developers. So first couple of things to notice. So when we open up a pull request, we see where the person is trying to submit it to. They're trying to push it into our development branch. Now for DNN platform, development branch is the primary location for the next upcoming release of DNN software. And as we get closer to a release, there will be a point, the last couple of weeks of that release, where we'll actually branch off development and allow it to go into testing. So we'll actually have a release /DNN 741, for example, that only exists for a very short period of time. Very slow. We don't do pull requests against it. So we do the pull request against development. So if it doesn't make the 741, this will automatically roll up and continue. So this right now, development is actually our 742 branch, and 741 will get released independent of this. So this allows us to keep multiple versions of DNN in development at one point, at any given point in time. So I see that she did the pull request against development. I can see here that she did it from a branch called bug 5981. So that's just a convention we have for people internally, is that if you're going to do a branch to fix a bug, you just name it appropriately according to that Jira item. And so that really tells me that she's putting it in the right place, and it's coming from a local branch. if we were to look at one of these community pull requests, say this one here by Jan Jonas, again, we're going to see he's doing a pull against development, DNN software development, and it's coming from his repository in a branch that he's called DNN 6913. So by him doing it in a branch, it allows him also to continue to work in parallel and have multiple pull requests open at any one time without them stepping all over each other. So he does all of his pull requests in individual branches in his own repository, even as we have multiple branches in our repository, right? So that's
so that brings up two questions, Joe.
Yeah.
Jan Jonas, he realized that naming convention makes sense, but if somebody, I don't know, doesn't pay attention or doesn't realize that that's the case, like, and it comes in, email bug fix for the branch name, how does that affect the process?
Yeah, so when we come through, we actually have to look, because there are cases, so a lot of our guys now are just used to the convention, but occasionally, and I don't know if I've got one currently, occasionally we'll get someone who is submitting from their own development branch, and we actually just had one yesterday that came in, and I may or may not be able to find one that's open right now. But what happens is, so let's say Joshua had submitted this from his development branch, right? And so maybe it takes, so you can see he submitted this in January. So that 3 months ago, 4 months ago, he submitted this pull request. If he doesn't realize that he's got an open pull request from his development branch, and he starts making more code changes, all of those additional code changes and commits will then start showing up here. And instead of being a fix for one bug, it suddenly becomes a fix for 5 or 10 or 20, right? Because as he changes that branch, GitHub automatically keeps this in sync, so I see all of the changes. So he needs to ensure that he's giving us a unique branch, so that as he makes changes, we don't get too many. Also, it allows him to keep that thing open. So like we have cases where people will submit a pull request, a couple months will go by till we get to the pull request for whatever reason, and then we'll go to merge it only to find out that his branch no longer exists, right? And then the only thing we have to go on is we have to manually go through, look at the changes that GitHub has saved, and we have to manually merge each of these changes. So it really adds to some of the complexity of this process. For the most part, if you run into one of those cases, if you're doing a merge, just talk with a more senior developer on the project who's got maybe a little more Git and GitHub experience, and they can help walk you through the process. But
so you went a little bit deeper than I intended. That was going to be a follow-up question. So this particular Joshua Bradley here, he didn't name it DNN hyphen the JIRA number, right? It's long path. So assuming this just fixes a single bug fix, and he called it long path instead of DNN 4 numbers, how does that affect the process at all?
That doesn't affect the process at all. Like, I don't care what his branch name is called. I only care that he has a branch and that he didn't get a bunch of extra commits against that branch for a lot of unrelated work, right? So I want the pull request itself, everything, all of the commits in the pull request have to deal with this one JIRA issue, right? So you don't want to.
And that's the part you were talking about with like having different pull requests, so that way they don't step all over each other, because you're able to look at one specific update, right?
Yeah. So you might have. Let me pull. I know Peter's got one here that's got multiple pull request or multiple commits against it. So if you come in here, you see that Peter has actually been working on this one pull request. He's got 6 different commits against this thing, right? Which means that he probably didn't do this in one go, in one session. He may have done this over a day or two, or over a weekend, or maybe even over a couple of weeks, depending on how complex the pull request is, right? So he could have submitted a pull request right after this first commit and just kept adding commits over a couple of days or over a week, and GitHub will just keep adding them to this list as long as they're all from the same branch.
Mm-hmm. And so if he wants to work on something else that's not the user redirect, he should create another branch.
He should create
in that branch, he does whatever updates he wants, and then submit the pull request when he's done.
Right. And if I were to come back now and have a comment and say, Peter, this one change in this one file, so let's take a particular file. So if I go in and say, oh, you know what, this username switch right here is not correct, and it should be something else, I could enter a comment about that, and Peter could then go and add another commit to that branch to fix it. He doesn't have to delete this whole thing and then resubmit the entire package, right? And so it really simplifies the process, because we can just keep iterating back and forth in this one branch from Peter, and he can make the changes based on the conversations we're having and based on the reviews that we're going through, and keep sort of this thing open. Often you find for other projects that you might have a pull request that goes through dozens of comments and gets half a dozen or a dozen or more commits against it, as the feedback he gets incorporated into subsequent changes. And then when everything is ready, you do one last process at the end. So when we first start doing a review, so we come in, we're going to look to make sure it's being pulled against the right branch. You know, so that's important, that that it's coming in against development. It helps that it has to be in its own branch. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but it just, you know, we like it to be that way because it keeps things isolated. But ultimately, I just want to make sure that the commit is the right commit for this issue. The other thing we look for in commits when they first come in, we want to make sure that there is a JIRA issue associated with the commit. And the reason for this is our QA team doesn't look at pull requests, they look at JIRA issues, and we track everything off of our issue tracker, right? So I should be able to go into JIRA and just go in here to DNN tracker.
So for the people that are less initiated, you know, the Git is our source control instead of using an SVN or TFS. And then when you say JIRA, this is our issue tracker or bug tracker that we use for DNN.
Yeah. So we're looking for DNN 5981 here. And I apologize for the slowdown right now. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's a bandwidth thing with Google that's hogging it, or something weird's going on with JIRA at the moment. We'll come back to this. It looks like it's...
Well, was that a stab at net neutrality?
No, this is not a net neutrality thing. This means I don't have a big enough pipe in my house to support all these streams. Or it might just be that my machine's running slow at the moment. I'm not quite sure what the issue is. But anyway, that's going to come back. We'll just see the JIRA issue there. But this is where the QA team works out of to know what items they need to review for what release. Okay, so we make sure that every pull request has the JIRA number. There are a couple of exceptions. So like if you're making a minor typo edit, if you're just changing a resource file because a label is mislabeled, or there's a typo, or you're doing some XML documentation on a particular API method, we don't require a JIRA for those cases. But if you're changing code, changing application behavior, creating new CSS, adding another image to the system, or changing images, we want a JIRA for that. and that's really so that we can track everything from a QA perspective to know what work needs to be reviewed, and that we can track it all the way to completion and know what release it's going out in.
So part of this should sound pretty awesome to the people that haven't been around DNN for that long. Is that, you know, it's reasonable for any developer to be expected to do developer code. Like, okay, I changed some code and I viewed it on my page and it appears to work. But then with this Jira, having a Jira item and then doing the merge request, they actually, without them having a QA team themselves, they get some QA work done against their code that they're contributing. That's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you know, Jira does have, or GitHub actually does have an issue tracker of its own, but it's not quite as full-featured, actually nowhere near as full-featured as Jira, and we really like Jira. It does a nice job of keeping things in sync, and even within Jira, I can see that it's got one commit against this bug. I can see that there's a pull request that's been submitted to fix this particular bug. I know what version of the platform it's targeted for. So there's a lot of other things that go on in Jira, and it's really targeted at a different community of users. But
so
we do require that.
For the committers, how does that link up for them?
So it sort of happens automatically. I mean, yes, the Jira issue needs to be created, but then once you label this way in the pull request, it will automatically link up between the two systems. You don't have
all you have to do is prefix your title there with the Jira item number.
The title. We like it to be the prefix, but as long as it's somewhere in the title,
okay.
And realistically, I think it really only needs to be in the commit down here. It doesn't technically need to be in the title. We do that as a process thing because it makes it easier when you're looking down a list of pull requests to see, you know, like I'll probably go in before this is fully submitted. I'll go in and fix this title because I want to see like a pull request number, and I want to see a short identifier that tells me what this thing is. This here is not helpful at all because now I have to physically go into this to understand, right? And it takes more time and effort to do that. This is one where probably need to go back and review this as to why there are two items against this, and it may be that those are duplicates or something like that. I don't know, but this is a case where as a committer, I would have some questions about this pull request, which is probably
that particular one. There's two items there that you said, and those are different commits on the same branch, and those are the comments that are put into the actual push, right?
Yes. So this is the individual commits, right? So this is she pushed something up 15 days ago against 4122, but then she did something against 6840, and it's unclear. Like looking at this, it makes me think these are two separate issues, and something has happened with this, and it needs to be reviewed and possibly possibly rejected and ask her to resubmit it correctly. Right. So this is the first part of the pull request process. It's a very manual, has nothing really to do with GitHub. It's more about making sure that before I start doing any actual work on this thing, that this pull request is something that we want to accept, or that it's in the right way. So normally, if I were, say, if it was just the title that was off, I could come in here, edit, fix up the title for them. In this case, because it looks like they've got two commits, I'll probably leave a comment, close the pull request, and say, you know, resubmit them as separate pull requests. Right.
So one of the things that you just said probably should be reset maybe, because you said this is a very manual process, and one of the powerful things here is that everything you're talking about was not possible, what, 2-3 years ago. It wasn't possible for most of the people on this call to contribute something like that. So it's somewhat manual here, but it's probably like 100 times easier than what it was, right?
Yeah, so this is really just about saying somebody gave me this box of code, right? I just want to make sure that they labeled the box so I know what's in it, that there's actually a tracking item for the box in the form of Jira. I want to make sure that they accurately described what's there, because I don't want to have to go over to Jira, read a bunch of stuff, and then come back into GitHub. I like it all to be in GitHub. We're kind of a little more forgiving of that right now. But as we go forward, we'll probably get a little bit more strict on that. But these are all process items, right? These are not really driven by Git or GitHub. Like, I could accept any of these things if I wanted to, but as a project, we try to do a little bit of upfront legwork, because we know once we accept this thing into the code base, it's harder to get it out. It's harder to fix it later. It's harder to QA it once the code is in. So if I can add some quality checks up front, it just helps us in the long term. So those are all sort of the pre coding pieces that we do, just to make sure that this is the right thing to be adding to the platform. And then, so now I'm convinced that DNN 5981 is a real bug. It's got to be fixed. Now I can actually start doing a simple code review of this to make sure it's the right thing. And again, I don't have to leave GitHub yet. I can do all of this right from GitHub. And I can look here and say, okay, this is a resource file change. It looks like a reasonable label. There's an unknown email address error. I can look down in the sign up ASCX and see, okay, she's doing some things around checking the email to make sure it's not null or empty, and if it is, she's returning the host email. Otherwise, she's returning some other value. So I can look at this and say, well, this seems reasonable for what she's doing. I'm seeing basically some fallbacks from host email to portal settings, or to some other value here at the end. So again, what we're trying to do is make sure that portal, that there is an email address that's available to be sent from, right? And then finally, she does some other checks further down, depending on whether someone's on the hosts tab or possibly on the admin tab. So anyway, right now, having looked through the code seems reasonable to me. There's nothing here that leaps out at me as being a problem. A lot of times you can see things initially in the code that might make you say, wait, why are they doing this? And if that were the case, I could click on a code and I could just leave comment just on that one bit of code, right? And that's really nice, because it allows me to say, hey, what's going on with this? Why did we do this? And I've done that a number of times. Someone's changing a value somewhere, maybe it's in a SQL data provider script. You can say, wait a minute, why did you change this value from 1 to 2? You know, and things like that. So we do an initial code review to make sure it looks reasonable. If I have a lot of code, like I would not do this for Peter's pull request, right? Peter's pull request, I can tell you, is beyond something that you're going to do a simple code review for. There are 10 file changes here. You probably are not going to fully understand what all of these changes are doing, and you're going to have to look at it in the editor. Okay? So in this case, now I'm going to go back to her pull request. Where is it at? Here's send mail. So I've got this one. I know it looks okay. let me go ahead and make sure my local development environment is where I want it to be. So I'm now I'm using a Git development tool, and this one's called SourceTree, available from Atlassian. So Atlassian is the same company that does Jira. So very good set of tools. This is a really nice tool. So I'm just going to go ahead and check out the development branch, which is where I know we should be working against for this one pull request.
So what's happening when you did that?
So effectively what it's doing is on my local machine, it is switching all the code to say what is the code associated with development branch or DNN 742, and it's getting the right version of that code, right? So it's just making sure that all my local files are the right files that are associated with this branch of code.
So before you did that, you had one set of code and files in there, and it could have been some specific version or whatever.
Right.
And when you did that, it replaces those all with whatever's in that branch.
Correct.
In the same place.
Yeah. So I'm going to end up, if I can get my machine to cooperate here and actually execute this. Wow, this is really taking a long time, and I don't know why.
This always happens when people are looking.
Yeah, you know, and even though my machine, well, it's at 61%, but that still shouldn't be a problem here.
So while it's doing that, SourceTree, I use SourceTree. I love SourceTree because it basically takes all the commands going down Git and it gives it a nice GUI, and it's free. So those are some of the more powerful things for that. And it looks like Peter wants to say something.
Indeed. Yeah, just as a side note, I mean, there are some commands you cannot get in SourceTree, and for that you have the big button at the top saying terminal. As soon as you hit that, the regular Git bash starts up on that specific Git repository, and then you can start typing all your fancy commands that you looked up on the web, how to roll back your last commit, for instance, or something like that.
So we'll just do this from the command line. So I'm just doing a git. Oh wow.
Oh snap!
Yeah, of course. So that's awesome.
It is when Git starts to be funny.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and kill that and see. And we'll just restart SourceTree. Let me make sure that.
Another thing I like about SourceTree is it seems to be updated on a weekly basis or something.
They do update it quite frequently, and I may have problems here if I can't get to come back up correctly, because I really want to do things from SourceTree and not from the command line.
Yeah, SourceTree makes things easy.
I'm not a big fan of having weekly updates of a program that I have. It always makes me wonder, like, couldn't you just catch those bugs like before, or you think?
Yeah, it's not always bugs that they're pushing down, though, right? Sometimes it's enhancements. So.
Yeah, but it's basically taking the SaaS model to a desktop program, right? You're constantly getting updates in the SaaS model.
So let me see what these uncommitted changes are that it thinks it has. And the problem is with performance right now, it shouldn't be performing poorly. It just is not. Wow.
So that's essentially the same thing as right-clicking that and checking it out, right? Well, if it worked.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Let's go ahead and close these so I can see platform Git index lock. Let's close all of this. We'll just delete that file and do it again. So normally I don't have this issue, but of course, because we're recording today, the demo gods have come out. The demo grand.
No, but this kind of stuff's good though, because somebody else might run into this.
Yeah, so we're looking for that block file. There we are. Lock file, go away, and then let's start.
That's how you unlock things, folks.
Lock, go away. That it didn't magically disappear. I did have to hit the delete key. So for people who think the file just disappeared on its own, mostly those Linux guys who didn't see me actually hit a key. You know, I know for them I would have had to open the command line and do something. But
Hey, we love Linux people now, so you know.
Oh,
cool.
That's right. We're embracing Linux.
And to be fair, it gets from Linux.
What's that?
To be fair, Get is from Linux. It has roots from Linux.
Yep.
Yes. And there are days when I dread that fact. As Peter, I'm sure, has pulled out many a hair over Git and wondering exactly how drunk Linus was when he created the system.
Well, actually, there's one thing that I have begun doing is some of my more frequent procedures I've begun to script in PowerShell, and I think that's a great way to do some stuff that may otherwise be quite hard with source tree.
Yep. So let me just I'm going to do a reset here and clean out my environment just to make sure. So git reset hard, that basically just makes sure that I have the head of the commit, and then I'm going to do a git clean here in a second. So that just makes sure that I've got a fairly clean local environment.
The most recent.
Just for all those viewers, that is typically one of those commands that you cannot find in the UI, as far as I know, on source tree.
Yeah, I don't know of a way to do that in this particular UI. I'm sure it's there somewhere. I'm just not aware of where that's
Well, speaking of, like the UI here, so we got a file status, branches, tags, remotes, stashes. What are those things?
Yeah, so let me just run a clean. So clean is basically going to get rid of any file that's not in the repository. So if I've got files like binary objects or object files locally, or other files that might have been created, like I must have done something with Razor or something on that install, so it'll remove all of those. So some of these other things. So you're asking about what's a stash. So a stash is basically I made some changes and I'm not ready to commit it, but I want to save it locally so that I can recover it later. So I might stash some of my changes, like so all of these unstaged things down here, I might stash them and then reapply them to a branch later on.
Yeah, what you need to keep in mind is that you're not allowed to switch branches while you have stuff that is unstaged, that Git detects, if you like. So if Git all of a sudden
that's part of the problem I had earlier. It saw a bunch of stuff and said this is.
If it sees those files, it's like, hey, you can't go anywhere else. You first got to do something with this. Now the problem is that the logical, the thing you would normally do is commit it because you've just been working on something, so you commit that to whatever you're working on. But sometimes you just don't want to do that. You don't want to commit this to the current branch you're in. So then there is this stash command, which basically just parks it. The one thing, there's another thing you need to keep in mind is that when you stash it, you have n stashes. It's a stack. So you can push it. You push it to a stack. You say, okay, well, stash this, boom, and it goes. Now, when you want to recover it and you look at what the stash contains, you will just see that single stashed batch of files, and you can draw it out. And it will be, you know, a last in, the first out kind of operation. But actually, if you have stashed a couple of times and you look at that list, you'll see that there's several bunches of files stuck in your stash, and you can actually selectively grab those stashes.
Yeah. So what I'm doing now is changing branches. So I'm checking out a development branch. So I'm effectively moving. I was in this master branch, and my UI, for whatever reason, is not updating correctly. It's still showing uncommitted changes, even though I know that there are none there. And I'm switching over to this development branch. So it's busy checking out those files, and this would normally go 10 times faster than what it's doing at the moment. But again, I think I'm just having a bandwidth issue at the moment. So this gets me in my local development branch because I want to make sure that that's a clean branch for me. I want to get that environment clean, make sure I pull down all of the requests and everything. Yep. So I'm just going to do a git pull to make sure I've got all of the items from the remote. So if I were doing this in wow, this is just, source tree is just not keeping up at the moment, and I'm not sure. I just think my machine's a little overwhelmed at the moment. Because it should be showing me that I'm in the development branch, right? It should be reflecting the same thing that I have here in my Git bash shell.
Should we give some more background info on what's happening right now?
Yeah. So what I did was I have a local copy of this repository. So I have a local copy of DNM platform, which is a duplicate of the software that's up on GitHub. And what I just did is I said, okay, give me any changes that exist on GitHub that I don't have on my local machine. So bring those down to my local machine. So it went out, it found that there were some 93 differences between GitHub and what I had locally, and brought those down. And
right. And just for completeness' sake, that GitHub is called the remote. That's what it's pulling down from. Yeah.
So for me, I have it labeled as the origin server or the origin remote. And if you were to see over here, and source tree just really is not.
No,
it's having trouble at the moment, and I really need this to deal with this at the moment. Well, we'll work around it. We'll let that continue to churn. So now I want to look. Let's say this was a more complex one, and I couldn't just look at this code and say yes, it's okay. There are some code changes here, and I'm going to want to test those locally, maybe, and just validate this, right? Because part of my job in doing this merge is just to make sure that the code that was submitted actually does what they say it does. In some cases, you'll get ones that are like uber trivial, right? Those I might not do a full-blown set of tests locally on, but this one, you know, I probably want to go in and make sure that, yeah, I can actually send an email, and it's not gonna somehow like if I don't have a portal settings or host settings email, that it's not gonna blow up, right? And this looks to me to be in the sign up process. So when someone's creating a new account, you don't want the email to maybe throw an error. So I've got a valid development branch here now, and it should be all reset. I might even do another get clean. I don't really need to do this, but because I know that the difference between master and and development's pretty minor. So again, there wasn't any need to clean out any files there. Okay, so now I've got my DNN platform. It's local. Now let's go look at this code. So that gave me the original DNN software code. Now what I want is I want to get the code from this particular developer, and I want to pull this down locally. And the easiest way to do that is I open this command line, and it's going to give me the commands that I need. Now this get fed origin, because I just did a pull, I don't really need to do a fetch. Fetch normally is just going to go up and do a diff and see, do you have all the latest pulls? Do you have everything you need? And I do in this case. So now it says do a git checkout -b means make a branch, and that particular branch is going to be based off of this, and it's going to be called this name locally, and it's going to be based off of this remote branch. You don't always have to do it this way. Like I could just create a branch locally and do a checkout separately or do a pull from this local, but we'll go ahead and use this command here. And so often I just copy that down. Work here. Paste that in. Right, and so GitHub is nice that it gives you the exact commands that you need if you're not used to it. After you've been doing it a while, a lot of this you kind of get used to.
Well, that's something I found with Git in general is the first time you touch it, you feel like an alien looking at something for the first time.
Yeah.
But then after you do, one commit, you're like, oh, okay, I kind of get this. And then after the second or third time, you're like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. It just starts to build from there. It was a very intriguing process for me.
Yeah. So notice that it moved me from development over into this other branch. So I didn't have to. So like normally when you create local branches, like normally I would have created this branch based on development. But because I already had this other branch that was up on the server, I could create it off of the server copy instead of just saying git checkout B and using development here would have branched off my local development. Does that make sense? Vicens or Eric, you guys still with me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. So I've got this bug bit that's down locally now. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a git merge with development. And so the reason for that, so this git merge is effectively saying take everything that's in development and merge it into this branch, because what you want to make sure is that maybe she did her branch based on an old version of the development environment or of the development branch. So we're taking all of the later changes that have happened in development and moving them over to this branch. And you can see that there were some other changes that happened in development that are going to get applied over to this branch. So a bunch of line changes and stuff. So anyway, so now this bug branch is a copy of everything that Eleonora had and a copy of everything that was in development. So now I have a local branch that is fully up to date, has all of Eleonora's changes, and everything that was in development prior to this. Okay? So now I have all the code local and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and open up that project now in Visual Studio. And this is all, now we're into the DNN part, right? This is quote, the easy part for us DNN guys. This should be the part that everyone is familiar with. So what I would do here is I would go through we may or may not get through this depending on how slow the system is. So I would go through now. I would do a debug compile, and probably don't even need to do that. Actually, let me back that up. We'll wait for this to run because there's a couple other things that I'm going to do here.
So while this is running, Joe, would you say that I'm assuming not for every pull request you would do a compile and like the simpler ones that you explained, but for the more intricate ones, you would want to run the complete application from that branch, right? So
yes.
So you would do a complete setup and installation of the application off of that branch that you just created.
Yes, anything more than a single line change, I absolutely will, and even most of the time for single line changes, I absolutely will clean this out, do the merge down to my local machine, because the nice thing about Git is that if you look here, it didn't create a new location, right? Everything all stayed within DNN platform. So all of these files are currently this this branch, right? All these files reflect all of the changes in this bug DNN 5981, right? Because this Git folder actually has the full database of all the changes for all the branches that I have locally. So it goes and makes all the file modifications that you need in the rest of these. So I know I don't have to have different solutions, or I don't have to have 20 different directories on my local machine. I just operate out of that one directory, and I'm good with that. So Visual Studio should finish opening up, and again, performance on the machine today is just, I definitely are going to have to do a reboot after this show's over, clean some stuff up. But so when this is done, so the steps I would go through is I would do a compile and build against the debug version. I would do a compile and build against the release version, and then I would do one last compile and build against debug. I don't need to do that final one, but I do it anyway, just so that I know that the last set of code that's in there is debug code. And part of the reason for that, the release compile is there so that DNN will build out all of the extensions that are installed by default. So each of the solutions, and each of the projects, there are 70 projects in the standard DNN solution, and about 40 of those projects, maybe more, will create individual extensions that get installed in DNN. Well, those extensions, we don't check those in to source control. We only check in the raw source code. So there needs to be a step in there that actually takes the raw source code and packages up each one of those extensions. And that's what I would normally do here. I'm going to skip this because it's just taking too long. We may come back to it if we need to.
Joe?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm repeating what are you doing here on my local copy. And on my source tree, for example, even I did a pull on development, I still see some uncommitted changes.
If you have uncommitted, yeah.
I see some uncommitted changes on my local development. How you get rid of those from source tree? Is that I see that there's an option that I can right-click on origin development on the head and say reset current branch to this commit. Is that the appropriate way?
You can do a reset. That only does part of it. You can do a discard on the individual files, or you can do the commands that I showed you here in the one, which was git reset hard. Basically says reset to the latest branch that's available up on in the repository, right? What's the official head of this tree? And then the other one was git clean dxf, and that basically says get rid of any file that Git doesn't know about, right? So that gets rid of web config. It gets rid of all of those zip files that we were talking about. That would get rid of anything that was sitting there that might be in some changed status. So between the two, between the git reset and the git clean, that should ensure that you do not have any files in uncommitted status.
Just one comment, please,
Yeah.
on that. There is actually there's a simpler way to do that, which is basically to junk your whole directory, everything except the .git directory, which is hidden. Because what actually is in the .git directory is basically, you know, your whole history, all the files, etc. It's all in the .git directory. So you could say, you know what, I'm going to junk everything that's there, and then go, you know, git reset, and everything will come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I tried discard from source tree, and that worked just perfectly.
Yeah. So for one or two files, discard works fine. If you've got a whole bunch, like I had, and I'm just going to kill source tree here because it's just rubbish at this point. Everything is just dying on me.
There's one other obvious thing you can do, and that's stash your files just in case you're actually working on something.
You could stash them. What I find is 99% of the time when I have uncommitted changes, it's because of changes that came from the install process or whatever. You know.
No, I just mentioned that to be complete.
Yeah.
Okay, so in my the script I use to reset DNN that I created in PowerShell actually just cleans out the whole directory, because you kind of ensure that at that point in time it is absolutely exactly what it is on the server.
Yeah, and git clean and git reset effectively do that for Git, and those are, if you want to do it in a Git friendly way, those are the commands you would use. And in fact, you'll often find that many
deleting files off your drive is a lot faster, of course.
Yeah, but there's multiple ways to do it. They all have the same result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter, can you share that those scripts somewhere, by the way?
Yeah, I could. I mean, I definitely could talk about that a bit later, about those scripts, because I think they do speed up the whole process.
All right.
Yeah. So my machine is really not going to cooperate at the moment. It's just everything here is. I'm trying to scroll. I'm trying to close it down. It won't do anything for me. So anyway, so I would run that through Visual Studio. I would do the builds. I would do the local install, which I unfortunately can't do at the moment now. And then I would also run the unit tests. And again, I apologize, I can't do any of this if I can't get Visual Studio to respond to me here. Yeah, it's just garbage. So once I've completed all of my local tests, and I'll do a supplemental short video on building and testing, running unit tests locally, and we'll add that up later. So once everything is done, so let's say everything checked out locally and everything looked good, and there were no problems with the code, and it all looked fine. I could come back in here and just say, if this merge pull request button is green, I can just hit this button and this will come in, right? I don't have to do anything else. I'm merged. I could also do the same thing by running effectively these three commands, which changes me back to the development environment, merges those changes from that local bug directory back into development. And this basically says don't use a fast forward. You know, to me, fast forwards versus no fast forwards, I'm not really a huge fan of this method, but you can follow this for now until you get a little more advanced. And then finally, push it from your local machine into development. So if you're doing something manually, these are definitely, you could use those. These are effectively the same thing as doing that pull request here. And let me see if I can get source tree, because I really want to be able to show this. So source tree will show me all of the branching and everything that's happened if I can get it to work.
Yeah, personally, that's the part I was most excited about.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not wanting to cooperate with me here today.
Well, you guys feeling a bit more love for shell-based operations now?
Yeah, it's just really, I mean, this should have already displayed by now. I mean, you can see it's slowly painting this left-hand UI. So yeah, oh, there we go. Right. So part of the challenge with doing the merges using that button is, you see the way you've got all of these lines coming in here and coming back in. That's a result of doing merges effectively the way the way GitHub sort of guides you into doing the merges. There is another more advanced method for doing this, which effectively does what's called a rebase. So every code change effectively has a parent where that code change came from. What branch did it originate in? And then where did it get merged into? And so I personally prefer to see changes that come in sequentially. And let me see if I can find a good example of this. And that's effectively what rebasing does. So all of these came in last week. Let me see if I can find a rebase example so you can see what the difference is between simply doing a merge and doing a rebase. I don't know if we've had any for a while. Oh, here's one. Here's some. So these particular changes, if you look at these, you can see you can't really tell where these changes came from. So 6547, 6416, and fix this merge error. All of these look like they were just checked in directly into this branch. What probably happened is that all of these came in as a rebased commit. In other words, I basically lied to the system and told it that the parent of these changes was different than it really was. And so I'm just cleaning up the history of these things, and that's what a rebase does. It's a little bit more tricky to do a rebase, but it results in a cleaner graph or a cleaner history of all these items. So anyway, we can do that and cover that in another show. For now, effectively, I've gone through, I've compiled locally, I've installed it locally, I've checked out this change. Everything looks good. I've run unit tests locally to make sure their unit tests run okay. And now I'm ready to say, okay, this is good. So I'm going to go ahead, for the sake of this video, and just hit the merge pull request button, or I could run these 3 commands. And now I've got the pull request. It's asking me for what the merge message is going to be, and I'm going to go ahead and confirm the merge. One of the nice things about doing it this way is that then GitHub knows exactly how to back this thing out, or how to do a reverse of the commit. So if there's a problem here, I could actually do a revert, which will basically create a second pull request that is the exact opposite of the one I just put in. And notice also that by doing this, it says I can go ahead and delete that other branch. I'm going to leave these things here alone for a minute until I can later on today go ahead and fully validate this, this pull request. At this point, I'm almost done with the process. I'm going to come in, mark this as a merged pull request. Since I know that this is going into the next, not 741, because 741 is now on its own release branch, but it's actually going to go into 742. And so at this point, I've got a merged pull request that goes into 742. If I had done a rebase or done some other things, or maybe I needed to make a slight code modification during check-in, it's not going to see this as having been merged. It will see a new commit that came into the system, but not the exact commit that was submitted by Eleonora, in which case GitHub up here would show this in a closed status, and that's why we use the label, because our label tells us specifically that yes, this was merged, regardless of whether or not GitHub thinks it was. Okay? If for whatever reason we rejected this, I might add on an invalid or a won't fix label. If I later come in and revert this, I'll add a reverted label. So it just sort of tells me or tells anyone coming in to look at pull requests what the status is. And so once we're all done, so once I've done the labeling, once I've done the milestone, I can actually come in here and I can say, show me everything that's been merged, and show me everything that's coming in for 742. And then what I should see is somewhere in here I should see send mail, right? So here's that one that I just merged in. And so I can very quickly see exactly what's coming in for 742. I can see what code's been merged versus if I take that merged label off of there, what I'll see is there's probably one or two invalid items in here, or items that didn't actually get merged. So we use labels quite heavily. If you look at other open source projects, you'll also see they have a whole bunch of labels that they use that help them manage the process. And we'll continue to add and expand on these because these give us a really nice way to do queries against the system. So I've got one here. I generally look at new pull requests coming in and I'll label them with community if they're coming from community, and then I can see what community items have been merged for a particular, in this case 742. I can see there are 16 community pull requests that have come in. So we've got a couple minutes left of this. We do have a hard stop here at 4 for the architecture meeting today. So at this point, everything is merged, and the only thing I have left to do is come over here to Jira and go ahead and mark this pull request as merged.
So you've given us a lot of insight into what things happen on the other end. Like if I'm a developer that wants to contribute back to the core, I can of course write my code and whatnot. But from the looks of it, that's kind of the easy part here, right? Because you still have to go through, verify some of the code. You still have to do a bit of testing, and then it goes to QA, and then there's some other management around Jira items and whatnot. So it looks like a pretty intensive process.
Yeah, often actually it's longer.
Yeah, and like I said, we have a full document about this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we created a full document around this so that everyone can sort of follow the same process, because there are lots of little things, right, that having done a number of these, I know to look for the Jira issue. I know to look for what branch it's going into. I still had one last week, that I was working on with Oliver, that went against a branch that I wasn't expecting, and I had to revert it back out and then reapply it against the right branch. But if I did my review properly, I would have caught it before I did a improper commit, right?
Sorry about that. Keep me on your toes.
Yeah, no, it happens, and it's not a big deal. It just meant that I had to do move it to the right branch locally and then do a push up to development. So it was fine. It was an extra step for me, and because I hadn't done that extra step, it meant I needed to revert what was on the server and then do it right. But anyway, that's it's all those little process things. It's not really the tool things that are the hard part of dealing with the pull request. Okay,
so for somebody to get started with this, a brand new Oliver to the community, for example, what's their first step?
So there is a separate video that I've already done on creating a pull request. This really is about after the pull request is created, after someone has submitted a pull request, as an open source project owner or an open source project committer, how do you manage those pull requests once they've come in?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can put in the show notes the link to the other video on how to do the actual pull request itself.
Yeah, and I think something else we'll have in the show notes is a number of other resources that some of us have found useful to us as we've gone through our trials and tribulations of learning Git. So we'll have that there.
Yeah, and definitely, Peter, there are some places where you can take little shortcuts or things that make it go faster.
No, there's another approach to it as well, and I'm sorry, we seem to be running out of time here, so it's a little bit frustrating. You're actually merging development into a separate branch that you're using to explore what what the effect of the whole thing is. A method I use, for instance, is to stay on the development branch and to do a non-fast forward commit on that and a non-merge on that. So I actually have the files in limbo as if I was working on the development branch, and it stays much closer to actually how I'd work in similar scenarios. So taking it off the latest development branch, if you like.
So the reason that I do the branching locally because I want to. I'm also actively doing development locally, so I don't want to muck up my development branch.
Right. Exactly. No, but anyway, there was a couple of things I think that would have been nice to share. We have a hard cutoff at 4, so we'll just leave it at this, and maybe we should do this again with a faster machine and some and go beyond this to cover some of the more common scenarios that we have.
Are you offering up a faster machine, Peter?
It's not the speed of the machine, honestly. I don't know what was running in the background or what was suddenly bogging everything down. But I do this every day, and it's like 10 times faster, when I'm doing this. And I honestly don't know if the Google Hangouts is affecting it a little bit, or if there's something else that's running that I just couldn't see that was impacting it from a speed perspective. But I do appreciate everyone showing up. If there are additional questions or other things you would like to see covered, we can certainly do a Hangout Part 2, and certainly we'll get to the Hangover Part 3 eventually, I'm sure. And so we'll just plan to do a Hangout Part 2 and cover some of the more advanced topics. What I do want to make sure, though, is that we cover the basic scenarios and then we get those done so that we don't confuse anyone to begin with. And then once they get the baby steps, then we can start talking about things like rebasing and some of the other techniques. So, thanks everyone for joining Will and I this afternoon. Thanks, Will, for helping to host this and to keep us on track and to make me slow down and explain things. Certainly, hopefully the audience appreciated that.
Yep, thanks for everybody to show up. It's another great hangout. I think we definitely will do some follow-up on this. There's lots of other things that, even us on the call, on the hangout, are very interested in seeing. So look forward to more of these.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later.